So thanks everybody for attending. This is the first day of our first virtual Empower, and this is the advanced functions in QuickBase session. I'm Daniel Callahan. I'm a product trainer at QuickBase, and I'll be co-hosting this with Eric Molhman, who's a senior implementation consultant. We'll introduce ourselves a little bit more formally here in a minute, but we've got a few housekeeping items that we want to cover. First and foremost, this session is being recorded, including the chat and Q&A. And this is so that we can provide it to you guys after the session. This is kind of a build along or a follow along session. So having that recording will help you kind of go back to different points, or if you need to step out at any time, you'll have this at your disposal. As you've seen in the chat already, we would like for you to change the settings from all panelists to all panelists and attendees. That way everybody can see the questions you're asking. And that way when our colleagues answer them, you'll have a bit of context as to what's happening. So again, this is virtual, and although we'd love to be in San Diego with everybody, and we can't, we do want to provide the most interaction that we can with all of you. And so we've got a Q&A section in Zoom where you can go ahead and ask questions about the topic. And this is helpful because it moves slower than the chat. So if you don't want your question being lost or it's super important to be asked, throw it in the Q&A. If you just want to introduce yourselves and say hi, or if you got some technical assistance you need looked at really quickly, just go ahead and throw that in the chat. And then at the end of this session, we'll have 10, maybe 15 minutes of live Q&A with myself, Eric, and then the three QuickBase moderators who are Lawrence, Brian, and Evan. So thank you guys for moderating today. At this point, we'll go ahead and, one last thing we need to do before we jump into this session is there's going to be feedback. And so there should be a link in the chat where you can review this session and give us feedback. Being a virtual event, we would like as much feedback as possible. And then with this session as well, hoping to maybe provide it in other community events, we would love as much feedback as well. So if you can jump over to that link, and it'll be posted multiple times if it gets lost, giving us feedback will be helpful. At this point, let's go ahead and jump into the agenda. So Eric and I will introduce ourselves, give you guys a little bit of background. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a choose your own adventure element to this. So you can either build along with us, or you can follow along and then use the recording to build along if you get lost at all. The app that we'll be using from the Exchange, as well as this PowerPoint deck that you'll have access to, has an appendix that includes all of the formulas that we'll be using. So at any point you can copy paste them, or you can kind of go line by line and dissect them if you need to. Once we decide on what adventure we're going on, Eric is going to introduce our story and use case. And that's because we're going to be going through 6 exercises, and Eric will be covering the first 3 and I'll be covering the last 3. After we do complete those 6 exercises together, we'll be doing a recap on what we did, what we learned. We'll be showing you a resources page, and then we'll do a Q&A. And then, like I mentioned in the deck, there's an appendix. We won't be showing that, but you'll have access to it. We want to give as much time to the Q&A as possible. So I'm Daniel Callahan. I'm a product trainer. I've been at QuickBase for 5.5 years. I started on our care team, and then I moved to an internal role where I helped triage bugs and escalations with our product team. Then I switched over to another internal role as an application developer for roughly 3 years. And then earlier this year, I switched back to an external role as a product trainer. And I'll go ahead and pass it over to Eric so he can introduce himself.
Great, thanks, Daniel. So I've actually been with QuickBase now for 12 years in a variety of roles. I started off in our sales team. Similar to Daniel, I spent a number of years on our customer support team, moved over to what we call our solutions consultant. So picture the technical aspect of the sale. And most recently, I've been in a role called implementation consulting. Hopefully you heard about it in the product demo, but it's where we're helping people roll out their first use case as they become customers.
Thanks, Eric.
Yep.
So now's the time where we get to choose what we want to do. If you're pretty comfortable with formulas, you'll probably be okay building along. If you're a little hesitant, or maybe you know that you're going to need to step out for a little bit, you'll probably just want to follow along. Again, the recording will be here for you as well as resources like like the appendix full of those formulas. Regardless of which route you're going to take during this session, we'd love for everybody who hasn't already to create a builder account. What this allows you to do is to have an account where you can build your own apps, kind of Franken apps, trying out new features, and it doesn't take away app space or apps in your company's account. So hopefully you received an email or some type of communication asking to create a builder account. If you haven't and you still need to, just jump over to quickbase.com/builder, throw in a personal email address so it doesn't connect to your corporate account. And then immediately after opening that builder account, go ahead and jump into that email account and verify it so that you don't hit any snags when you're building today or when you're building tomorrow and stuff. So I'll actually be using my builder account today. I think most, if not all, QuickBase employees have a builder account. So we definitely use this as well. So I'll hang tight here for a minute while anybody who doesn't have a builder account can go ahead and create one. If you're able to create apps in your company's account, maybe you're an account admin or you have that permission, you can do that as well. We just recommend the builder account in this scenario since it's kind of a test app we're building, or actually an app from the Exchange we're grabbing and just kind of testing out different formulas and stuff. Once you have that account up and running, you'll want to click on the My Apps page. And there's a couple different experiences. So when you scroll to the right of your My Apps page, there's a Learning and Help column. Either at the bottom of it, you'll see a link that says Exchange, or at the top, it'll say Explore Sample Apps. And I've put boxes around those two links here. Either experience, click on the relevant link here. And then once you're in there, you'll want to search this string Empower 2020 : advanced formulas. You can also just search advanced formulas if you don't want to throw the whole thing in there. Eventually, you should find an app in the Exchange that was curated by Eric, and it's called Empower 2020 Advanced Formulas. It might say Virtual Empower Advanced Formulas, but some variation of that. Just look for the one that was published recently and has Eric on there. We'll hang tight here a minute since we'll be super active in this app throughout the session, and I want to make sure that everybody's in there. And if you are having issues finding the app in the Exchange, please throw the questions in the chat so one of our moderators can help you out. You can get to the Exchange by clicking here. I'll go back a slide really quick. From your My Apps page, you'll either see an Exchange button at the bottom of this Learning and Help column, or you'll see a Explore Sample Apps button at the top of it. Once you get in there, you'll want to find this app, the Empower 2020 Advanced Formulas app. If anybody's still having issues, we can definitely help out in the chat at this point. Since this is pretty packed with exercises, I'm going to throw this over to Eric so he can tell us about our story and use case and who we're role playing as.
Great. Thanks, Daniel.
Yep.
So let me share my screen over here, and then we'll cut into PowerPoint. So I want to take a minute to tell you a story. So unfortunately, with the move to virtual, it's a great thing. A lot more people can participate, but we're not sitting in sunny San Diego. We did, however, picture that we're the developers, builders, whatever, for a travel agency company called Sunshine Travel Agency. We've recently switched from a whole massive amount of spreadsheets into this new platform called QuickBase, and we found some fantastic uses here that we can do with formulas and other capabilities. And as we've started doing this, we've rolled out our first application, getting some positive feedback. We've heard a couple of things that folks would like to see done a little bit differently or better. Those three fall into three general categories. As we're sending out communications to our customers, there was a lot of wording. And as we all know, picture tells 1,000 words. we wanted some way to incorporate that visual element into our customer communications. Our second piece of feedback that we've received from our agents is we've had some issues with the link to a certain record going out to someone. They're able to manipulate it. So we wanted a way to obscure that data a little bit further. And then the last piece of feedback that we received is, especially for our newer agents, not a problem for our existing agents or those who have been doing this for a while, but our newer agents, they're used to typing in cities, but they haven't learned yet what the airport codes are. And that's what our travel agency software needs in order to work. So diving into those first three examples, let's talk about doing thumbnail capabilities within QuickBase. So hopefully you've all grabbed, as Daniel mentioned, a builder account, found this application in the Exchange. What we're going to do is use the three buttons here to go through those first three examples. And so I'm going to click into this one. Hopefully it's large enough. If not, let us know. We can make this a bit bigger. But for our visual element, we have two file attachment fields that we've uploaded for each of our destinations. That's hopefully going to tell visually that location's story and help the customers get into the mindset of going to this destination. So specifically though, we have a slight problem where our notifications are going out on what's called our itineraries table. And as a part of that email, we need a way to send a link or the picture itself inside the body of the message. As we take a look at the picture 1 path and the picture 2 path, what we've done is I've right-clicked this field. It brings up this menu for me as an administrator, and I'm going to choose the last option to edit the field properties. Inside each of these, I've also placed some documentation commented out in case you'd like to learn more about this specific detail. So what we're building here today is actually this type of file path URL. Side explanation, QuickBase file attachments are actually stored on a different server and we need to have this specific file path structure in order to get to that document the way that it's stored. You can read more about it on the second line item. That's our API documentation. It's one of the appendix there if you need more detail. So in case you've never seen it, one additional resource that I find highly useful whenever I'm building formulas is actually over here. We do have it in the virtual tech desk if you need a link to this. We've also got it in the resources a little bit later. I've changed my version so that I don't have dynamic filters or the English explanation, but you'll see that when you come in here. What this is doing though, is it gives the function name, for example, it gives the pieces of information that we need to give to that, and then it will tell us what data type it will return. And then there's some syntactically correct examples. So what I want to look at here is one called URL root. And you can come and find the other ones, but just this one, for example, doesn't need any pieces of information. It will return a text result. And in this context, it returns whatever your companyname.quickbase.com URL is. That's advantageous in case that ever switches. It's just a more universal way to write your formulas. But the way that we're building this, we start out with that URL root. We then see here in the documentation, we have to put in the literal text up with the / because that's part of the file path. There is a different function if you want to go reference it in that other report called dbid that actually returns the table ID of whichever table you're on. So in this context, we're actually returning this ID up here. We're then putting in the /a/r as our path indicates. We're then cutting out of the literal text that we're building to append to that what record we're on, which is what's represented by this RID up here. The /e is now indicating which field, because this table might have multiple file attachment fields. And in fact, if we take a quick look over here, it's a bit hard to see what that number is. So one other trick that I use is here in the advanced options, I can choose to pick the field ID, say save, And now I have all my field numbers that I might need. So as I scroll through this, we can see that picture 1 is field number 9. Picture 2 is field number 10. So if we were to look at the other example formula that we have, there would be a 10 here. And then the V is the version. So each file attachment field by default has 3 revisions that it can contain. You can extend that if you need more, but each file attachment, knowing that we could have potential multiple versions, we want to use this V0, which just indicates go and grab whatever the latest revision is. And then at the end, I'm putting on what the picture itself is. So as we take a look back at this, this is the specific file path out to our file attachment on that server, which then allows us, surprisingly, to go and add it as a lookup field within the relationship, which we can actually do right here for just the moment. So if we put picture 1 path and picture 2 path, and we compare this URL, it's the exact same as this one because we're looking up that field itself. The advantage now in that circumstance is if we flip over to the itineraries table and take a look at our thumbnails over here, we can see here's one where I'm sitting, specifically in Salt Lake. There's the 2 Hawaii pictures. Let's take a look at what these ones are doing though. So third step in this process is, again, I've placed resources on here if you wanted to learn more about it. So specifically, there's the image tag from W3 Schools. Great resource, love W3 Schools. And then from that same formula function reference, here is the one to the if statement. So from here, we're actually building out some literal text and starting off the image tag so that we can display our picture inside this HTML code. One trick I learned a number of years ago is that I made the mistake initially when doing these thumbnails to actually set the width parameter and the height parameter, but I found that it was actually squishing it the wrong way if my orientation was ever wrong. So what I've learned since then is if I only set one of those parameters, it actually dynamically generates the right scale for the opposite parameter that we didn't specify. The other thing that's important here to point out is this part, for example. So anytime you see a backslash, essentially that's going to escape out whatever the next character is. So I commonly use a backslash n for a new line. This one we're doing a backslash quotation mark so that we can insert a quote into the text that we're building. So next part is we're setting the source for that specific HTML code. So we have to put a quotation mark around that. And then this quote is actually exiting the text that we're building so that then we can insert that file attachment path that we just brought through as a lookup field. We're coming back into the text. We're then inserting an extra quotation mark to finish off the source URL. We're setting an alternative tag in case there's some visually impaired people interacting with this. And then we're finishing up the image tag. So all hopefully comfortable and familiar, but with that in place, we can now see how easy it was to place those file attachments, which technically exist on a parent table, in as a lookup field and then ultimately as an image tag so that then we can include it in our customer communications. As I'm switching here, I will point out that if you have any Q&A, again, we have some moderators helping out in the time frame. We've also should have plenty of time at the end if you'd like to ask Daniel or any questions. But let's move on to our second example here. So the second one, as I mentioned, is inside our customer communications, we're actually emailing out notifications to them because they're not users. We'd like to actually pivot over to Menti and actually, Daniel, do you have that up? I realize now I didn't actually prepare this beforehand.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead and share that one.
Can you see it?
Oh
yeah, people are there.
Perfect. All right, so what we're asking here is inside a situation where we're trying to obscure the record number, we have a few formulas here in the screen share at the moment. Can you tell me which of these would be a way to obscure it from a number into some kind of text result inside our notification? All right, we'll let the vote and keep going on, but let's cut back. Daniel, if you want to stop for the moment, I can move back in to our screen share right here. Okay, so for our second example, there's actually a new formula function that we've released within the last year, and we want to take a look down here in this field. And the correct answer is actually QB32 encode. So the other options that we had, I saw a lot of two formatted text, QB64 or base 64 encode, some of that type of stuff. I'll have everyone go and read the documentation if you'd like to learn more about those. But what this QB32 encode does is, as I mentioned earlier, we have this table ID. That's actually something that we could decode if we wanted and see the specific number that represents that table itself. Both versions work exactly right, or exactly the same. And so what we're doing here, just like last time, URL root db / and dbid to reference the local table. But this is now setting it to an action of the edit record. We're targeting some specific record ID. And if we take a look at the record that we were just on, QuickBase actually uses this R equals some kind of letter equivalent. So we're actually going to do that same pattern here with the R equals QB32 encode. And if we'd like to look at the actual documentation, the encode takes our number result and generates the text of that equivalent. So you can see an example over here. This is the table ID that I was just talking about. Decode goes the opposite way, where we might have some kind of text of the table, and that returns the number equivalent of that. So when we have updated this formula and saved this, now as we view our URL itself, we can include that in notifications out to our users, the customers themselves. And there's nothing to specifically stop them from changing it, but this is a lot less understandable. And that way they might not be able to switch it to something else, and we get false positives or false negatives based off of our customers. All right, so let's move on to our third example. And specifically, this was talking about the airport code, where we might be entering a city name, but we need to convert that over to our 3-digit or 3-letter airport code acronym. So let's cut back to QuickBase and move into example number 3. So I will, in your copy, you actually have the formula. I've removed mine from this version for the moment, just a few minutes ago, so that we can actually build these out from the ground up, and you can see the basic process of doing that. So I'm going to right click this, say edit the field properties again. This is also using a new formula function called search and replace. So you can see that we've got the reference right here if you need further details. But let me set the stage slightly. So as we're creating this itinerary, we might want to come in and say for Andrea Graham, who's going to be traveling to, let's come to my city. Let's go to Salt Lake. And we've got a travel agent, Chris Baker, whatever the case might be. We put in all of these type of pieces of information. But when we come down here, let's say that we're past pandemic. Hopefully by the end of the month next month, and she's going to be traveling until the following weekend. We say that she's traveling because we're sitting here in San Diego. Maybe she's leaving from Ocean Side, California, and actually going to Salt Lake City. As I mentioned, our newer agents are just used to putting in the city names, but a formula is a perfect example of how we can take that and convert it over to an airport. So let's look at that actual formula setup right now. So here, there is a new function. I mentioned the formula report reference, but there's also one more convenient use of this where we can come into the choose fields and functions. This will allow us to insert all of the fields that we have inside our table itself. But the most useful is to actually come here and say select a function. And scrolling through this, we can see a lot of different things. Here's again what we need to hand to it. Here's the English explanation. Here's some syntax examples. We're going to come down and use the new search and replace. So this one, we can see that it's going to have some kind of text value that we're searching across, something that we're trying to find, and then what we want to replace if it finds that. So if we put in here, and I actually did Oceanside, but I was meaning to type Oakland. So we'll do across our origin city that we're going to look for Oakland. This will actually be a good example because it's not going to be eventually in our result, but here it is OAK. So hopefully you saw as I was typing that out, if I'm putting it in, QuickBase actually gives me some help on what it's expecting. But as we now save this, it's showing me that for our result here, it didn't find an exact result, and so it hasn't replaced it. But if we then edit this and put in what I originally intended, Oakland, that now replaces it there. That's all well and good if we only have one thing that we're searching for, but we might be coming from San Francisco or Los Angeles or where our agency is sitting here in San Diego. So let's extend this out a little bit further using, wrong field, this one. So here, if we wanted to copy this a couple more times, let's make this a little bit bigger just so we have it all in a single line. We can actually then put these down on a new line. I'm going to also put a tab out here just so that we can have a couple more options. So San Diego, as I mentioned, might be SAN. We might want to have Los Angeles as LAX. We might want to have San Jose, if I can type, which is SJC. And let's do our last one, San Francisco, as the major airports in California. So here, we've now got all our different possible cities that we would commonly fly out from. And at this point, it doesn't matter if we put in San Jose or San Diego or any of those type of things, it's going to get our formula result. So second thing that we might want to look at in this is how to handle the destination city. So that's showcasing one of our new formulas. Fantastic use, especially if you're ever looking to replace some kind of text in your big text block that you're looking for. If you've been using formulas for a while, I actually have one more that hopefully the more astute of you have recognized. So if we now come here to destination airport code, we actually have a different function called case. So as much as search and replace was useful, we did have to go in and paste it as many times as we needed it. Probably not the greatest choice. We were just excited by the newest thing. case actually is more useful because here we can actually look at destination city. And then for the rest of this, let's put in a few options. So here, I'll actually just copy this. That way it'll go a little faster. Like I said, you've probably got your own version there already, but in this context, if we then are traveling to Las Vegas, we're going to put in that destination. Honolulu, we're going to put in that airport code. Salt Lake City, which is what this record is, we're going to put in that airport code. So now at this point, we have an extra result that is generating that. Now, as you probably think through this a little bit further, there is one more option that might even be better. So let's flip over to the destinations table really quick and note that we actually have a field already in place called airport code. So rather than having to do it as a formula, search and replace was one option, case might be a different option. We can actually just set them as actual data inside our parent table. And what that now allows us to do is set our destination airport code as whatever we want it, and then we don't even need the formula field. So hopefully this helps you realize that there are sometimes more than one way to accomplish a certain thing with a formula, but there's also options to do form rules or lookup fields or something like that. And depending on the situation, a formula might be a great option, but you could also find a different way to solve it. So, all right. And with that, we will cut back to Daniel, and that way you can take us through the other examples.
Thanks, Eric. All right, so let's go ahead and turn our attention to the managers at this point. And they also provided 3 key improvements to us app builders that they wanted help with. The first one is what they're defining as stale itineraries. So essentially an itinerary has sat in a specific status for over a week. It might be in progress and the agent's working on it. It might be waiting for customer and the customer hasn't replied, or maybe the managers themselves have dropped the ball and the status is actually waiting for manager approval or waiting for manager action, and they haven't taken any action on that. So they want some more oversight into those stale itineraries so that they can take action on those. Secondly, is managers want a one-click solution to approve or reject itineraries. So right now their approve reject process is a little cumbersome and they would like that improved. And then the last one is the status field is a multiple choice field. And most of you know that with multiple choice fields, you can't hide specific options or selections within that list from a user with their role and the role's permissions. So the best we can do, rather than creating a separate table, is to data validate that status field. And so we're going to go ahead and do that by using a newish feature in QuickBase called custom data rules. So let's jump into the first one first, which is the stale itineraries. So again, customers are excited about the plan or the trip that they've planned out. They've contacted the agents, managers, wondering why their itinerary status hasn't budged in a week. And so we need to go ahead and solve for that. We're going to solve for it by creating a formula that is going to give us the date of the last or most recent status change. Then we're going to calculate the duration between today and that date. And then we're going to throw that onto in a report filter for a report for them to use. So let's jump back into QuickBase. I believe you'll have this formula in its entirety, but I'll go ahead and wipe it out and build it from scratch and kind of tell you guys what each function does, as we've added multiple functions within this formula. So if you're on the home page, you can click button number 4, or if you're on the itineraries table already, since that's where we're doing the bulk of our work today, you can go ahead and open up this stale itineraries report. once you're in there, go ahead and open this James Hennings record. I'm going to pull this one out so that I can have two screens. That way I can show you what's happening while we're building the formula together. So you'll notice in the manager info section, we've got a status history field, which is a text multi-line where we're logging entries. So essentially when a status is changed, we're logging it so we have documentation of kind of all the changes made to the status of this certain itinerary. Below that, we have a field called recent status date. So go ahead and open that up. Actually, let me go back a second here. I'll open this up in a new tab. And I'll yank this one over here. Okay, so everybody should, oh, where did I go? Everybody should have a full formula here. I'll go ahead and wipe it out. The first thing we need to do here is since the end goal is to get a date, and you can see it right here, is we need to extract just the date from here. And so it's going to take a couple of functions to do that. And the first one we're going to use is write. And we know we want to be grabbing from the status history field. So you can either type that in the brackets or just grab it from your field list here. Once you have that, we need to know what our starting point is. So we want to go ahead and do \n, which is a new line. And essentially what this is doing is, let's say this status history had 3 or 4 logs in it. We would want to be taking everything after the most recent line break. So that gives us the most recent logged entry or status. So once we've done this, which is just grabbing, if there was multiple lines here, it would be grabbing this whole thing here. And again, we just need the date. So we need to do a little bit more work here. Once we've extracted that, now we want to do a left. And we're going to do left of the first space. Oh, what did I do here? There we go. We're okay. QuickBase is unhappy now, but once this is all settled, it'll be okay with us. The reason it's yellow is because it's a date field, and right now we're just grabbing text. At the end, we'll wrap this in a toDate. So if we look at this field over here, we've got this whole line, and now we're grabbing left of the first space, and the first space is between the date and the time. So at this point, if we were to save this, we would only have this. Oh, I'm sorry. I need to zoom in. Hopefully that's good. Yep, okay. So we would be grabbing everything left of the space, which would be the date, but we've also got this bracket that's kind of hanging at the beginning. So we need to do one more function here, which is not left. And then we need to designate again where we're going to start. And we're going to start after the first character. So again, we've grabbed everything to the left of the space. We've got the date, but we've got a bracket. If we want to get rid of that bracket, we do a not left function and then do a 1. So we're skipping the bracket. And now all we're left with is this text. And then our last function here, oops, is going to be a toDate. Since it's a date field, we need to wrap all of this in a toDate function. So at this point, QuickBase should be happy and nothing should be yellow on your screen. Again, the completed formula was already there. So if anything, you could have left it there and kind of built it with that as a little cheat sheet there. So let's go ahead and save this. We'll throw this back in here. And now we want to go back to that report that we were in.
One additional quick comment while you're switching there, Daniel.
Yep.
We do have a formula time of day field right next to that and a formula date time function right next to that as well. If you'd like some more examples on how to extract pieces of information from that log the changes field. So we have 3 examples. We're just going through one today.
Yeah, we're just grabbing the date for relevance for what the manager's bubbled up and for time as well. But thanks, Eric. I appreciate that. At this point, we want to jump back into that stale itineraries report. And you'll notice it had some records on here that don't have a date. So this new filter is going to filter those out. Additionally, you can see there's already a filter on this report, and it's just filtering statuses that are approved or rejected out of here, because to the managers, those are kind of final state itineraries. They can't really be stale if they're completed, whereas anything that's not in that status, it's still in kind of a midpoint. So let's click customize this report. We'll jump down to the filter section here and just add another one. And let's find that formula date field we were working in, which is recent status date. Grab that and then change the filter so that's on or before 7 days in the past. And you can see this will update dynamically. So now essentially any itinerary that hasn't had a status date change in 7 or more days is going to pop up on this report. And this will allow the managers to we could put this on the home page for them, or this could just be one of the reports that they check on a daily basis. Now we see this has whittled it down to those 2 itineraries. And if we were to go in here and edit one, and we'll change the status. Is it not on the form? There it is. Okay. And we'll change it to waiting for customer. And now you can see it jumped off this report. So this will help give managers a little bit of insight as to what's stale and what kind of actions they need to take, whether it's them themselves, the agents, or the customer. Let's jump back into PowerPoint so we can review the second exercise for the managers, and that is revolving around this approve or reject process. So right now, when they have an itinerary they need to approve or reject, they're editing the record, changing the status, saving the record, and then going back to their report to maybe take action on another itinerary that they need to approve or reject. And they're saying that's a bit cumbersome. They really just want like a one-click solution or a button to do the job for them. And so let's jump back into QuickBase. And from the home, if you're back on the home page, you can click the exercise 5 button or use case 5 button. If you're still here, you can just click on this manager approve or reject report. Oh, that's funny. There's usually if you didn't edit that other record, there's usually 2 on here. But I think the fact that I changed that one record away from waiting for manager, it popped off this report. So let's review these 2 buttons. You can see there's an approved or rejected. So let's go ahead and open up both of those in different tabs. That way we can take a look at them. Once you've opened them, jump into this record. And we'll look at approved first. So we won't be building this one from scratch just for the sake of time, but I do want to review everything that Eric hasn't covered within a formula and its structure and what this button is doing. So you can see this is an approved button. It's all written out in one line. And with buttons in QuickBase, they're really good at making an API call. So when you create a relationship between 2 tables, you'll always notice that add button on the parent table. That's very similar to this. It's just rather than an API edit record call, it's doing an add record call because you're adding a child record to it. In this case, we want to edit the record and we want to change the status from whatever it is to approved. And so you'll see over here, we have FID 31, which is field ID, and field ID 32. And if we go back to our record and we right click the status field, we can see it's 31 and then the history is 32. So what this button is doing is it's going to edit the record, change the status to approved, and then change the status history to approved. That way we're continuing to log all the actions. And then we have a redirect or an RDR, and it's redirecting us to QID 7. So QID in QuickBase is query ID, and reports are queries. So you'll see FID is field ID, RID is record ID. For reports, it's QID 7. And if we go back to our approve reject report, you'll notice that it's QID 7 at the top in the URL. So what we're doing here is we're allowing the manager to click one button to edit the record, change the value in a couple of fields, and then redirect them back to that report. So if they do need to take additional action on another itinerary, they'll be able to do that. So let's take a look at the rejected button now. And you'll notice it has a similar prefix here. It has the same API call. But here, instead of changing the status and the status history to approved, we're changing it to rejected. And then you'll notice this is structured a little bit more cleanly. So in the formula builder in QuickBase, you can create more lines, and you can see these kind of really, let me zoom in a bit, these really light kind of ghosted out lines. These are so that you can create, you can tab. And it's just helpful for legibility. It's not as condensed as one line, and you can see kind of what each step does here. So we wanted to show this as formula building. You know, maybe you've gotten feedback that as an app builder, it's easier to read a button or a longer formula when it's spaced out like this. The second difference here is we do have the redirect, but rather than redirecting back to that report, we're actually redirecting to a form, and forms are DFID, and it's going to form 10. And the reason we're doing this is because when a manager rejects an itinerary, we want to know why they rejected it. Maybe the discount percent was too high. Maybe we no longer fly there. Maybe the customer sent them an email and said, you know, cancel the itinerary. Whatever the case may be, rather than just saying rejected and not giving the agent or anybody a heads up, we want to be tracking that. So our first redirect is going to go to a form where they can put in the reject reason. And then after they do that, then we have a next URL, which is similar to a redirect, but this will push us back to that report. So if they have a third or fourth itinerary they need to take action on, they can go ahead and do that. So let's jump back into this report, or if you're on this record, go ahead and hit the reject button. You'll notice it redirects us to this form. And here's the reject reason. And we can say the discount percent was too high. And then, you know, note to agent, please reach out to discuss the discount. Then we save. And now we're back on this report. It's empty. There's only one in here. If you had not changed the record that I did in the fourth exercise of the first one for managers, you would have had 2 in here, and then you'd have 1 left. But at this point, the managers now have a way, just a one-click button to quickly approve or reject any itineraries they need to take action on. Let's jump back into PowerPoint here. And let's talk about the last exercise and the third one for managers, which is data validating a status field. So again, agents know they aren't supposed to change the status of an itinerary to approved or rejected. However, because we're using a multiple choice field, there's no way of really removing that option. You could use a form rule in this case to say, you know, when the user is in this role, and then adding a second condition of if the status is approved or rejected, abort the save. But maybe your agents have a grid edit report that they're working through where they're just changing the status, and maybe they're changing 10 or 15 at a time and they accidentally changed a couple to approved or rejected. The form rule is not enforced outside of the form. So either importing or grid edit or any other data entry method on a table, the form rule wouldn't be enforced. And so we want to use a new-ish QuickBase feature called custom data rules, where we can enforce data entry practices and data validation there at the table level. So before we do that, I do want to ask one last Menti question, and it's very similar to Eric's, is what function would you use if you're trying to solve this? So go ahead and jump back over to menti.com. The code is 609750, and let us know which function you think you'd use in QuickBase here. And we won't hang out here too long, just so we have enough time for Q&A and everything, and we can go through this. Okay, it looks like we don't need to stay here very long. This is awesome. Yes, every single person is right. You would use user roles. So let's jump into QuickBase. Again, if you're on that the home page, click on button number 6. If you're in the itineraries table, go ahead and just click on settings. And like I said, we're leveraging custom data rules, and they are powered by QuickBase formulas. So we want to go into advanced settings within the table. Then at the very bottom, there's advanced table settings, and you'll see one called custom data rules. If you're more interested in this, if you've never used custom data rules, or you want to kind of see how they can be used, I'm actually hosting a session tomorrow that has a new use case, and it'll be going over 3 exercises about custom data rules and a little bit more background on what they are and everything. So we'll do one exercise today. If it kind of keeps you thinking, or if it gets you thinking, how else could I use this? Definitely visit the session tomorrow, and we'll dive a bit deeper into custom data rules. So at this point, I've deleted the formula, and I want to go ahead and rewrite it from scratch here. And like you guys said, we want to use the user roles function. But before that, we need to inject an if, or start the formula with an if function. Let me zoom in one more time here. And your little fields and functions might be down here. If you're zoomed out or zoomed in a bit more, it might be over here. But once you click into the box, you'll see this fields and functions pop up. So we want to do user roles. And there's a couple modes in user roles. There's name. So you could do name and then travel agent. Or you can do ID. And rather than typing in the name of the user's role, you would type in the ID. I prefer to use it this way because the name of a role might change. And if you do that, this would break. Whereas an ID, like a field ID, is hard-coded into the table. And so it'll never change. So what we want to do here to go find the ID is click this drop down here and open your app settings in a new tab. Once you're in there, go ahead and click roles. And then we'll want to click on the travel agent role. And up here in the URL, you'll see it says role ID equals 10. So we know that that's the ID that we want to use in here. So we would say 10. And you notice QuickBase is unhappy because we're not really saying anything right now. What we need to do is actually search all of the role IDs that are spit out. So we want to know, of this user, are they in this travel agent role? Do their role IDs contain 10? And now we also need to know about the status, because if they change the status to in progress, we don't want to impede their workflow. We only want to do it if the status, is equal to approved, and we can copy this, or you can retype status, rejected. And now this is where custom data rules are a bit different, is now that we have our condition, oops, not and, oh no, we're good here. Now that we have our condition, now we want to spit out a message.
Closing parentheses after your 10.
Oh, thank you so much. There we go. Happy QuickBase. now we want to go ahead and spit out a message to the travel agent. So rather than just the save aborting and not giving them any insight, we can go ahead and write them a message. And maybe you have a bunch of rules. Maybe the agents have a bunch of rules that they're adhering to, and they have like a cheat sheet of rules. We could say rule number 1, only managers can approve or reject itinerary. I feel like I've spelt this word a million times. I still can't get it right. I think that's right. Or you can just take the rule thing away and just simplify it and just have the message and say, hey, only managers can approve or reject itineraries. Please reach out to your manager to have this itinerary reviewed. Like Eric was saying, with newer agents, they may not know this or they forget, and so they change it. And so we want to say, hey, this is why it failed, and then here's an action item on what you can do. Now, in addition to this, and this is good practice with formulas in general, is commenting. And so this will only be viewed by admins or app builders in here. And so what I like to do is say who created the rule. And that way, if another app builder comes in here, they know who to talk to and they know how old it is. And then I also like to do last modified by. Maybe this was modified yesterday and things are breaking now. You would know who did it and when they did, so you could chat with them to see what's going on. And you could also comment it out and say what this is doing. Agents prevents the record from saving when agents change the status to or reject. So similar to how field properties have a comments tab, formulas are nice to comment out as well. So let's go ahead and save this, and then we'll go ahead and test it together. And I'll zoom out a little bit. Everybody's okay with that. What we'll do is we'll jump back to the itineraries table. We can just open up the list all report. We'll make sure that the status field is on here. It is. Let's go ahead and test as the travel agent. We'll do grid edit. And again, because this is at a table level setting and not the form, this will be enforced rather than a form rule that wouldn't catch this. And you can see now when I try and save, the first thing QuickBase does is it highlights the 2 records in the back. And then it tells you record 1, why it failed, and record 2. In tomorrow's session, we'll go into more depth about what you can include in these messages. You could include the record ID. You could include a link so that they could click on something. Just think of custom data rules as a formula box, formula text box. So anything you can do in there, you can throw in here. You could add spacing in here so it's a little bit more legible. So if there was 10 records that failed that rule, you would get 10 of those. And so that gives the agent a heads up of, oh, this is what's wrong and this is what I need to do. So we'll go ahead and end the test here. So that's the last exercise. At this point, we'll jump into a recap and then we'll quickly get to a Q&A so you guys have about 10-ish minutes to ask us any questions you have. So let me jump back over. We'll briefly cover this. So we covered those 6 exercises. Eric took care of the 3 that were for the agents, and then we kind of turned our focus towards the manager. We'll do a quick resources slide and then the Q&A, and the appendix I won't cover as it's just at the end of the deck that you'll have, but it's just the copy pasted of the completed formulas for you guys. So resources, first is the university. This is where you can find recordings of current and past Empower sessions, community summit sessions. We have our certification program there and a bunch of other recorded content that's super useful. If you're not in the mood for that and you'd rather talk to somebody, you can jump over to quickbase.com/contact us to open up a support case with our care team. Eric and I both came from there. They're really awesome, really helpful. And you can open up a case, maybe you need help with a formula or report or whatever it is, you can open up a case with them. If you're more interested in what other builders are doing in QuickBase, you can jump over to our community. So there's thousands of posts on how people are using QuickBase. If you have a question, you can ask it there. If you want to share something, you can put it there as well. So definitely more open-ended than a support case. And then lastly, Eric was using this throughout his 3 exercises, is our formula function guide. I know that URL is not very friendly to jot down or anything, but just know that it'll be in the deck, so you can just copy it from the deck. And that shows all of the formula and functions with all the definitions and examples. And then lastly, we'll open it up to Q&A. So everybody will jump up on here and we'll ask questions, we'll answer questions as well as we can. If you need to jet, thanks for attending. And hopefully you'll have a good rest of your Empower. Definitely come to my session tomorrow if you have any questions on custom data rules. And at this point, we'll open it up to the chat and we'll answer your questions. And also, before any questions come in, sorry if we were rushing there towards the end. We definitely had a lot that we wanted to share with all of you. So hopefully at least one of these formulas was new to you or got the brain going on how you can leverage some of our new functions. Again, there should be a link on reviewing or giving us feedback on this session. So we'd love to know if we went too fast, if it wasn't advanced, if there was too many examples. So please let us know. And the recording will be available via the Empower platform. I don't know if it'll be available by the end of the day, but definitely by the end of the week. And then that platform will be available all the way through mid-August. So don't feel like you need to get all the content and recordings by the end of the week. It'll be there for a while for you guys.
Let me address some of the ones that I see still sitting in here. So Jana was asking to show the second formula again. So this one is, the important part is just wrapping some kind of number field. So I was using it as record ID number in the QB32N code. There's also the opposite, which is the QB32D code. And that one is how to flip back and forth between the two. Let's see, Kim Gardner asks about the approve button. You can actually, I think there was a question earlier. So just to be clear, whenever your button itself is doing a direct API call, so think API edit record or API add record are the two that I commonly use. One of the optional parameters in the API documentation is RDR, stands for redirect, but you have to then use the URL encode for where that next step is. So in the reject button example that we gave, there's actually 2 essentially redirects. The reason that we used next URL is if there's ever a manual add or edit page going on, it's when someone goes and clicks that save button itself that the next URL takes effect. So that's why our reject button is actually doing an API edit record to update the status field and the status history field. We're then redirecting using the RDR statement to the form where we're requiring them to fill out the rejection reason. And then the next URL is taking us wherever we want to. But according to your question, we can send the redirect or the next URL to whichever URL path we want. Tom Hurt says, Daniel, this might be more appropriate for you. Can you use custom data rules to stop a role from changing a numeric field?
Yeah, a great question. So it like with the status multiple choice field, it won't stop them from selecting the option, or in your question, Tom, it won't stop them from changing the numeric field. It'll just stop the save from happening and then give them a message saying, hey, you can't change that field, or maybe they're trying to change it to a value that's outside of a range that you've determined. Maybe you only accept 0 to 200, they put in 500. You could you could abort the save and say, give them a message saying the numeric value needs to be within this range, or whatever your use case is. So it won't stop them from changing the field. It'll just stop the record from saving. If you did want to stop the role from changing a numeric field, you'd probably just make the field itself read only or view only so that they actually can't edit it.
And we've been told that we have 7 minutes left before we have a hard stop because another session needs to get ready. To speak to Shelley's point that she mentioned just a minute ago, with the formula itself not working, a few thoughts come to mind. Depending on if you're putting in the new data at the top of your text list or at the bottom, the formula is going to be different. So what I'd suggest there is we're participating in the community, the QuickBase community Slack channel. Feel free to ping us on there if you'd like to discuss stuff specifically. Daniel also mentioned our fantastic care team. You're welcome to put in a care case if you'd like more help on that. There's also the tech bar that you're welcome to sign up for. So lots of resources to dig into that specifically. Formulas are specific to the situation though. So we'd have to take a look at what your setup is and how the formula should be changed. So.
Yep. And Bobby's asking about form rules versus custom data rules. I briefly mentioned this. It'll be covered in the session tomorrow, but form rules are only enforced at the form level and for that specific form, where custom data rules are at the table level. So they cover more points of data entry, like importing, grid edit, shifting panels in a Kanban, editing stuff in a calendar report. So it's much more comprehensive and robust than a form rule.
So Tammy mentions that she wants to see an add record with a redirect to the same form. So let's take a look at the approve button. As I mentioned, this can be an API edit record. It could be an API add record if we wanted. Whatever this action is, there's a number of those calls that you can do as long as you can make sure that the thing will happen and then you can go somewhere else. So in this circumstance, if we were doing an add record, we wouldn't necessarily need to add a record ID, so we could delete this part. We could set the status still to approved and the status history to approved, but the redirect here in that situation, we're still going to leave the same URL root, the same DB, the same DB ID, because you wanted to go back to the same form. And then maybe if we were coming from the new record page, or, I mean, bad example, but if we were wanting to do that, maybe we end up doing NWR to go back to the new record page. So on here, we can essentially click this button. It's going to actually go and create a new record and set that status and status history. And then the same kind of thing could happen here with the approve button. I mean, I could keep clicking this button all day long. And if we take a look at our itineraries table, they are, where's my, yep, right here, approved and approved. And if we look at the status history as well, those two fields have been populated. So whatever we'd like to put into that button itself, you can do, and then the redirect literally just says, where do you want them to go afterwards? All right. Any other questions? We have, looks like 3 minutes left now, according to my clock.
And they don't have to be questions about the formulas we covered. If you have any formula questions that we can answer in 3 minutes, go for it.
Okay, so Tammy, follow-up question there. About to the same record, the problem is that if we're doing that, we don't know without some trickery. There's ways I've gotten around this. Without the redirect, you have to specify where to take them. And since this record number doesn't exist yet, we don't know which record to toss them on afterwards. Now, if you're adding a child record and need to come back to the parent record that you just came from, you'll have the record in place already and you'll know where to take them back to. So again, I mentioned earlier, find us on Slack, schedule a tech bar session, contact our care team. Happy to go through the specifics there if you'd like more detail.